when you talk to people who play football or basketball, when you meet a little kid, hey, do you want to play football? Like, yeah, I love football, I want to play. Their goal isn't to be a 4-time Heisman Trophy winner in college, right? They don't talk about that. It's not like, hey, I'm going to be the 4-time Heisman Trophy winner, I'm going to go to Alabama. It's different. But in wrestling, you ask a kid when he's 10 years old, what's your goal? I'm going to be a 4-time undefeated NCAA champion. So the pressure, the psychological side of it it's fascinating to me that's what we think about, instead of we just want to participate in the sport because we enjoy it.
Okay, Jason Borrelli, I wanted to start this thing with 2001. You enrolled at Central Michigan, and at the same time, Casey Cunningham, who's one of the most sought after coaches in the country, one of the most well-respected coaches in the country, was starting his tenure there. What do you remember about Coach Casey Cunningham in the early days in your relationship with him?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of great things to talk about Casey, or to say about Casey. I could talk about him for a long time. He's a guy that had a tremendous impact on my life and still is in my life. You know, Interestingly, for me, it was an awesome experience having him as a coach, but a big part of that is because I grew up watching him wrestle in my dad's program, and he was a guy that I aspired to be like, and who was kind of that larger than life hero to me, right? And everyone has people that they looked up to in the wrestling community, and I have lots of very accomplished names that you would know in wrestling, but Casey is certainly one of them. That when I was in middle school and my dad was recruiting him, and then getting into high school as he was competing for my dad, um, he was just the guy that you looked up to, that did things the right way, that you felt like, um, was also, he was a guy who wasn't heavily recruited, wasn't the phenom coming out of high school, was very accomplished, but he wasn't the guy, and kind of came from middle of nowhere in Michigan and came to Central to help build a program, and did that. And then I got to wrestle for him, and so it was an awesome experience. And he's just a great human being. He's just, I don't know how to explain Casey, but honest, genuine, isn't going to beat around the bush and just tell you what you want to hear. Which, when you have a great relationship with someone and they can be honest with you, that's like, that's really meaningful, right? And they and but also led by example. He was a guy that, he was the assistant coach who everything he asked us to do, he did, right? And so he lived it, and was able to show us the way, and it was a great experience. He was good for me because it brought good balance to a situation that was unique already, right? I was wrestling for my dad, and sometimes wrestling for your dad and training under him, it's tough, and having Casey there was kind of what I needed at that time. So.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the stories you have got to be endless. But I mean, going back to when you were in middle school, your dad's the head coach at Central Michigan. He was at, a JUCO like Superior State before that. And so he's starting to build this dynasty. And then, Casey comes in. I mean, as a youngster, what memories do you have of him wrestling and winning that national title?
Yeah, I have a lot. So I can remember when he first got there. I remember my dad. They had a good recruiting class. Casey's class. When he came in, my dad did really well in the state of Michigan in recruiting. I think they signed Greg Mayer, might have been in that class, who ended up being a round of 12 guy for my dad. Devon Gray, who was a multiple-time Fargo champ, and maybe these are names people know, maybe they're not. But at that time,
Okay.
at that time, they were good, and that class was a great class. There's numerous others, but anyway, they came in. But Casey stood out simply because of his work ethic, right? And the lifestyle he lived, and where his goals were. He had goals to be a national champion. And that was one of the first times I remember athletes talking about winning national championships. And it wasn't just coming from my dad's mouth, right? When my dad took over, he kind of the mindset, we're going to work hard. That's all we know. But we're going to do this. And if we're going to do all this and put all this time in and commit, we're trying to be the best. And heard a lot about that from my dad. But when Casey got there, it was, here's a guy who has goals to be an NCAA champion, and talked about it. And then his actions were in line with that. And so he was special in that regard, because you go to a practice, and I remember being in 8th, 9th grade or 10th grade watching practices, and you just noticed Casey. It was from everything, from the minute guys were lining up partners people were trying to avoid Casey. And I used to always be like, why aren't people going with Casey? Is he a terrible wrestler? I didn't know. But come to find out, because whoever had to drill with him that day and started practice, by the time live wrestling started, they were so exhausted from drilling with Casey that they couldn't even function during live. And so everyone tried to avoid Casey because he was the guy that drilled so hard. It was in your face. After every rep was back up in your face, was just all hustle and wore you out. Heavy hands, had his hands on you the whole time. And you noticed that as a young kid who's getting into wrestling, sitting off on the side, it was like, wow, this guy just never stops. And then, my dad would say up and jog, and most guys would get up and they'd be jogging, the smallest version of the room they could create in their own mind. That's what they would jog, right? Whereas Casey would be on the outside, almost sprinting, touching every corner of the wrestling room. And he was just that guy. And then you watched him compete, and if he went out of bounds, he sprinted back. When a guy was taking his time to get set on bottom, Casey was standing right behind him bouncing. And, it just was like the Energizer Bunny. I never got tired. And you notice those things. And so it had a big impact on me. And I tried to wrestle like him and train and do everything I could like him. It's really eerie if you go back and watch like my middle school matches and even college or high school matches. You would see me bouncing like Casey, sprinting back. My stance was like him. And so he just was the guy you wanted to be, and had a big impact on me. And I joke, people think I'm making this up, but I used to write CC rules on everything when I was in middle school and early days of high school. My walls in my room would say CC rules. My folders would say it. And people would always be like, what is CC rules? And I was like, Casey Cunningham rules. And they were like, you're weird. They kind of make fun of me, but he was just that. He was the guy that he had an impact on me. And then I got to wrestle when he coached with my dad, and he was my coach for a little while. And so it was a great experience.
It's so funny to look back, when you first see that college practice where, whether it's you're just kind of like getting a tour of the Iowa room like it was for me, or you where you're going every day. I mean, anytime that a young wrestler sees their first college guy drilling, you're just amazed at how hard they go. And it's just so cool that you got to see that with him, up close and center so many times.
Yeah.
So
And I saw I saw quite the opposite sometimes too. I saw the guys, you sit off and you see the guys that were real lazy drillers, and you could tell they wanted practice to be over in the first 10 minutes, but
And so you're, all this is kind of going on under your dad's tutelage. Did you start wrestling from the jump, like when he was coaching on the junior college circuit?
Yeah. So, well, no, I didn't. Great question. I got into the sport very late, I would say, considering I came from a wrestling family, right? So my dad, we were living in Atlanta. My dad was coaching at high school. He was teaching health class, PE and health, and then he was coaching football and track and wrestling at a high school when I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. So I was very young. He moved from there. He left there. I don't have the years exactly right, but I was young. I was very young, and he ended up getting a grad assistant, an assistant position at Clemson when they had a program, and he went there. So we moved to South Carolina, which is where my mom and dad grew up. And so I was around wrestling there at a pretty high level. Clemson had a decent program then, and there was a lot of great wrestlers there. But I still wasn't into it. I wasn't really, there wasn't youth wrestling like there is now, right? It was hard to find youth wrestling at that age. There weren't the clubs, and there weren't as many tournaments. And so then we moved to Michigan. And when we moved to Lake Superior State and my dad started coaching there, still was no youth wrestling. There were no clubs, there was nothing. And so although I watched wrestling, knew my dad was a coach, and went to dual meets and idolized a lot of the wrestlers, just didn't do it. And my dad wasn't around a lot to, introduce it to me or have me and my brother do it at home. I mean, we kind of did, but, and then even when we moved to Mount Pleasant, when my dad started coaching at Central Michigan, there was no youth or feeder program at the time. And so I played all the other sports, right? And so we moved there in 1991. I was probably 10 years old when we moved to Mount Pleasant, and there was no organized youth wrestling. So aside from summer camps or any of that, I played all the other winter sports. I played hockey, I played basketball, I did everything. Not until 7th grade, when I got into 7th grade in Mount Pleasant, was when there was a middle school team, and I decided to wrestle. And actually, it was hard for me because I had to give up playing hockey, and I had played hockey for a number of years. And in Michigan, hockey is a big deal, and there's a lot of youth organized hockey. And so that was tough. I remember thinking like, is wrestling or hockey, can't do them both. And I chose wrestling. And then, so I started competitively, like taking it serious and really getting into it in 7th grade. So for a coach's son, I think that's pretty late, getting into the sport.
And did you just love it right away?
I did. I think I was really motivated, right? I actually, I had Casey, and I had hearing my dad talking about winning, and CMU was starting to get a lot better. And I was just super into it. I had a lot of drive, had a good middle school career. I mean, middle school was a lot different, as you might recall, or at least for me in my era. You just wrestled the middle school season, and then you did freestyle tournaments in the spring, right? And we had a middle school team. We went and did dual meets and some tournaments. You wrestled about 20 times as a middle school kid, and then spring would roll around and you'd try to hit some local developmental like freestyle tournaments, and then you'd go to your state meet, and then you'd try to make the Fargo team. That was all you did. We didn't go to big national events or travel really outside of our kind of region. And that was my introduction to wrestling. And I did that in 7th and 8th grade, and then got to high school and kind of picked up from there.
It's just crazy to think. I know you have 3 sons, how different it is for them, now. I mean, I understand you guys have a wrestling mat at the house. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have. I mean, my kids are into it, and I'm torn because our kids we have a little mat. They love wrestling. As a matter of fact, my in-laws, my wife's parents are here, and they've got the mat out in the garage set up, and they're wanting to wrestle every day with him, and they're really into it. But I enjoyed not having the pressures of starting until a lot later in that competition, and not having to be young and dealing with, the competition anxiety.
Yeah.
And so I'm torn between when's the right time to start my kids, right? Like keeping them exposed and excited. They love watching it. They go to the matches. They love turning it on TV. They ask about it all the time. There's probably real value in that, right? If they start competing and going to tournaments too soon, maybe they don't like it as much. Maybe they don't really enjoy it. And so it's a kind of a balance. I can see them wanting to do it now, and they're young. They're, one's about to turn 6 and the other's 7, and then the other one's really little, but they really are into it. But I'm trying to hold the reins back a little bit.
It's cool that they're fans of the team, though. I mean, do they get into it at the duels?
Oh my goodness, they know all the top wrestlers. They talk about Penn State and Iowa, and I mean, it was Bo Nickel forever, and Jason Nolf, and and Jordan Burroughs, the top level guys, and any of the college guys, and they know who's good in our conference. They talk about the Pac-12, and they talk about Pappy's teams, Central Michigan and the MAC, and they've got it down. So they ask me, I read to them every night before we go to bed, and they always want me to go through the NCAA, the book you get, the program that you get at the NCAA tournament. It has all the pictures, and then all the qualifiers names, and they make me read all the qualifiers at every weight all the time. And they're asking like, read us all the qualifiers at 133, and then at 141, and they just love it. So it's kind of neat.
Oh my God, it's so cool. I mean, you think back to your age, and even my age, I'm 30, you'd be lucky to see one college duel a year. And maybe it was like Iowa State, or maybe the NCAAs, but now obviously they're exposed to it because you're the coach, but even if they weren't, you could still see a tremendous amount now, more than you ever could.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. What I think about is my kids, they grow up in this bubble with me, right? And we watch college wrestling a lot. If the Pac-12 networks is on and we don't have a duel, we're watching that. If the Big Ten network's on and I'm not on the road, we're watching that. If something's on Flow Wrestling, I'm watching it. So our kids watch it. I think what's funny is our kids think wrestling is more mainstream than it is. And when they're around their buddies and stuff and other people, they talk about wrestling like it's football or basketball. And I just start laughing to myself because I think some of our neighbors and some people, they're like, why are these kids like, they're like super into wrestling, and a lot of people don't know a lot about it, right? But like our kids think it's on the same level as everything else, and so hopefully it will be by the time they get a little bit older. But it's just interesting.
I mean, it's so cool that, and for folks who don't know, your dad still coaches at Central Michigan, and so those are two Division I coaches in the family. And I understand your wife's from is she from a wrestling background as well?
She is, yeah. So my dad's coaching. He's in his 29th or 30th year at Central Michigan. My wife's father wrestled in high school, was a state finalist a couple times, and then went to CMU and wrestled there for a year. Ended up not finishing, but they're from same mid-Michigan area. He went to they actually her dad and Jenna, my wife, went to the same high school as me, so we grew up in the same area, and she's from a wrestling family. So.
Man, that's awesome. And I love that they're thinking it's on the same level. The one thing you mentioned a couple minutes ago, though, that I want to come back to is you said you don't want to expose your kids to wrestling too early because, they'd have to wrestle with some performance anxiety. Is that something you battle with as a college wrestler?
No, I mean, I don't recall myself having too much of that. I actually feel that's one thing that I talk a lot about that I probably had less of than most people. When people tell me, do you get nervous? No, I didn't. And I think a lot of that is because I felt like I genuinely lived the lifestyle and trained consistently with what it took to be successful. And so that brought me great peace of mind that I could just go out and perform. Still, though, I know it's a big part of the sport. Once I got into coaching, I realized how much bigger a deal it was. Now that I've coached for so long, I've just coached so many athletes that have that. And I mean, yes, you get the butterflies. I had them, right? You get amped up. You're going out there. There's uncertainties, but it was never overwhelming to where it affected me, I felt like. But certainly I've seen it with our athletes, and I know it's a big part of the sport. So.
The preparation obviously eliminates so much of that, but I'm sure you've seen countless guys that do live the life, but still get out there and struggle with that. For some of the wrestlers who are listening now, or some of the parents listening, what do you think is causing that? I know it's so individualistic, but just if you had to share anything.
Some of it's probably pressure, right? Pressure either we put on ourselves or pressure that other people put on us. Because naturally, and in other parts of the sport's different, right? There's pressure to perform for somebody else, but there's also the sport's set up to create a little bit of that. I mean, one of the few sports where it all falls back on you, right? There's nobody out there to default to, but I think of like gymnastics and track, right? Those are the same thing. They're in swimming, they're individual, but the difference is there's also not another human being who is your age, your weight, trying to actually stop you or make you look silly, right? And that creates a whole nother level of psychological, problems. Here's me going out there all by myself, no one to blame it on, but I also could be humiliated in front of my peers because this other person is better than me, and now I have to accept that he's better than me, and there was nothing I could do. So the sport just naturally plays into that, the psychological part, but I think some of it is pressure. I also, Ryan, would say one thing that I've noticed with our sport, which it bugs me a little bit, is we almost like, when you ask somebody what their goal is, right, in our sport, almost always they're either like taught this or somewhere, like it just comes out, I want to be an Olympic champion. I'm going to be an Olympic champion. I'm going to be a 4-time undefeated NCAA champion. And we hang the moon on those types of things. But could you imagine, this is funny, like I think about this. When you talk to people who play football or basketball, when you meet a little kid, hey, do you want to play football? Like, yeah, I love football, I want to play. Their goal isn't to be a 4-time Heisman Trophy winner in college, right? They don't talk about that. It's not like, hey, I'm going to be the 4-time Heisman Trophy winner, I'm going to go to Alabama. It's different. But in wrestling, you ask a kid when he's 10 years old, what's your goal? I'm going to be a 4-time undefeated NCAA champion. So the pressure, the psychological side of it it's fascinating to me that's what we think about, instead of we just want to participate in the sport because we enjoy it. And so we all grow up thinking we're going to never lose. We all grow up thinking we're going to be 4-time NCAA champions, Olympians, and very, 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 very few do. Nobody really. I mean, think about the number of people that wrestle. It's so small that it's almost like nobody does it. That then, like, it just messes with your mind. So that's what I think. I think there's just this weird pressure in our sport, and we feel like if we're not living up to that, we're letting people down.
Well, and so many people who I've had on the show, I'll walk away from an interview and I think, I know how bad they're hurting about maybe losing in the blood round or maybe losing in the finals twice, whatever it is. Like, it doesn't matter what the actual place is. If it's, if to that person, national champ was everything, getting second 3 times was the worst thing. Right.
Right.
But if the guy's goal is an All-American, losing in the blood round is the worst thing, right?
Right.
And so, but I walk away from the interview and I think, God, how much different would the person's life actually be if they had ninth or eighth or first or second? And a part of me says a lot, and part of me says really not that much. What do you think about something like that?
I agree. I'm glad you point that out. So that's actually one thing that I take great pride in is when I lost my senior year to be an All-American. I lost in that round of 12, right? I won my first two matches. I got beat, and then I lost to place, and I was devastated. I was that guy who thought that, that the world had ended and there was nothing that good was going to come forward because I fell short of my goal. And Casey Cunningham actually was one of the first people that talked to me other than my dad, and my dad hugged me and told me he was proud and that didn't need to worry about that. To be being a champion didn't mean being an All-American and all those things, and which was great, but you're still like, yeah, whatever. But some time passed. We were driving home back, or we were driving back to the hotel, and Casey knew that I was shook up. I was sitting shotgun and he was driving, and he looked over at me and I was just distraught, and he said, "Let me ask you this." He said, "Could you have done anything differently?" He's like, could you have done anything differently to be prepared? Could physically, mentally, just could you have sacrificed any more? Could you have been more into it? And I said, no, I can't think of anything. And it's just not, I was just upset. And that was part of the reason I was upset. And he's like, well, that's all that matters. That's all that matters. If you can go to bed and tell yourself that you did everything right, you gave yourself the best opportunity, it just wasn't meant to be, it wasn't your day, you can't hang your hat. And I thought, man, you're right. And that helped me sleep better for a long time because I felt like I fully committed, I fully invested and did everything I could, and it just wasn't meant to be. And then, I guess it's never exciting to be that, but like at the same time, that's now what I want my athletes to be able to answer. Can you at least say you fully committed, did everything you could? Now the outcome doesn't matter as much if you can do that. It's about the process. Did you do everything right in the process? And if the outcome's there, great. If it's not, it's not. And I've even told our athletes before that match, when I started coaching in that round, I wanted to make sure that they were in the right mental state of mind. I just said, hey, it's another wrestling match. It won't change you. Tomorrow, you'll wake up, you'll breathe the same air, you'll use the bathroom the same way, the world will be the same. It's not going to change you. So don't psych yourself out for this match thinking it's life changing. And maybe it has an impact, I don't know, but I feel good telling, because I think we need to see it that way. So.
Oh, how much more impactful is it when it's coming from a guy who you look up to and respect, which I'm sure all your guys do, but at the time your dad said it, it's like, come on, Dad, but then when Coach Cunningham says it, it's everything.
Yeah, but probably a lot. Yeah, exactly. I think when Casey, I remember that very well, very vividly. And that's because he had a big impact in my life. And I remember my dad's words too, but there is something to say about coming from Casey because he was an NCAA champion. And I did respect him so much in the wrestling world,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that philosophy of, input based versus output based is just so fascinating to me. John Wooden's wrote a very small book. It's like his principles on leadership. And he says every time that they won a national title, they could go out there and he felt comfortable sitting in the stands and just watching it happen because he knew that based on the way they prepared, they were, they'd done everything they could do. It's just a very freeing thing to read.
Yeah. Yeah. I have not read that, but I imagine that's true.
Yeah, it's a great book. I'll actually send it to you. I have a ton of copies of it. I keep them on hand. But
awesome.
Speaking of that, you grew up as a coach's son. You were around some great coaches. Do you have a leadership, like in terms of how you build your team or how you structure your team, that's kind of your North Star for the season?
Yeah. Well, more kind of like culturally, like what we're about. And for us, we have some values in our program, and there's 6 of them that are really important to us, and they're really important to me. And one of those is family, right? And it's interesting because you can just throw that word out, right? You can say we're a family, but you really have to define what your family is, because what I've realized over the years is that uh, family looks different to everybody, right? And so people come from broken families, people come from families with one parent, people come from wealthy families, poor families, people come from there's just the idea of some families are really hard on you. Some families are real soft and like, coddling, and so we have to define what our family is and what's going to happen. What our leaders, our parents of our family being the coaches, how we're going to interact with our kids. And, but also what we expect of our leaders, our captains, our veterans, and our older children, right? Like, so we have to talk about that and break it down. So family is big for us. We want to be in it for more than just ourselves. I talk to our guys a lot about just being unselfish. We would never, in a family, if you thought about this really, or if you're an employer trying to hire somebody, or if you were marrying somebody, you would never want somebody selfish, right? You would want unselfishness. So that's tough in wrestling, because those kids probably grow up hearing sometimes, you got to be selfish, you got to worry about yourself, it's all about you. And we're asking the opposite. So we have to be very clear on that this is unselfish. You're embarking on an unselfish 4-year process, 5-year process. So that's big. We have other things. We want guys to work hard. We want them to sacrifice. But like the underlying thing that I learned from Casey and my dad that I've probably brought to my coaching is that you can have those pillars. You can talk about passion and positive attitude and making sacrifices and working hard and family and integrity, all these things. But if you don't do them consistently, and you don't do them with a disciplined approach, none of it matters. So the things I learned from both Casey and my dad the most, and really a lot of coaches that have been in my life, are consistency and being disciplined with your approach. And once you establish your core values, if you can do them in a consistent and disciplined approach, you'll be successful. So.
And especially when you surround yourself with the coaches you do, I mean, it holds you to such a high standard because, they're watching you. I know Coach Terrapelli and Coach Blake, Chicago represent. He's a Chicago Marist guy. Got to give some love there.
Yeah, that's right.
We're based here in Chicago. That's a great program, Marist Catholic. So got to give love to those guys. But talk about your assistants and what they do for the program, because a lot of times they're in the room and you may be on the road. If I'm understanding things correctly.
Yeah. So, well, first off, you nailed it. You can't at this level, well, at any level, right? If you're trying to run a great program and have the right culture, you have to be surrounded with people you trust, and people you can depend on, but people that are just high achieving individuals and work hard, right? And Alex and Ray, I cannot say enough great things about them. They are guys that anywhere, if I ever went, whether I was starting a business or needed something, they're just guys you can depend on and that you would want on your side, right? They're great individuals. So very fortunate in that regard. And you're right, though, sometimes, and don't get me wrong, we disagree on things. And the best part about our staff is that we've kind of broke it down into, okay, if we're going to disagree, let's get together as a staff, right? Let's be in the office. Let's bounce things off one another. Let's tell people we don't agree with it, but we'll make a decision, and then we come together and we support it, because the rest of our team needs needs to feel like we're moving in the same direction and we all agree with anything, because that's how the ship can go forward, right? And if I'm saying one thing and he's saying another, and then people they're distracted, they don't understand what to listen to, they're pulled in different directions, it's bad. So I just can trust Ray and Alex so much. We've been together a long time now. They care deeply about more than just winning and more than just the wrestling side. They care about the individuals. They care about doing it the right way. They want to win. They're as competitive as the next person, but they understand the impact that we as coaches have on young men's lives, and that's really important. And I'm just so grateful that I have them on staff.
Yeah, they're Terrapelli. I've never spoke to Alex, but I've had his brother Adam on twice, and I love that family. And those guys are just, you would just trust them with anything. They just do the right things, and they're just so sharp when it comes to wrestling and how they articulate their views. I love talking to Adam Terrapelli. Yep. Have you ever watched Coach Blake's 103-pound state final match? Have you ever seen this one?
I've only heard about it, but it's amazing to me. For those that don't know, Ray Blake, I mean, this is a guy who's probably 195 pounds now, just like really cut, big, muscly guy, like put together, fit, and probably could easily be 200 if he wanted to. And to think that he was 312 pounder as a senior, I think, is remarkable to me. I think I think he won the state at 103, right? And then
Yeah.
and as a junior, and then his senior year might have been third in the state at 112. But the fact that he is what he is now, there's hope for anyone out there who's 112-pound senior, that you could be a monster someday, because Ray's an example of it.
I mean, back in those days, they had to be cutting some hard weight. And if I'm remembering correctly, he was winning. He got called for stalling, and then it went to overtime. He got called for stalling with like 10 seconds left, and I don't think he was really stalling. And then it went to overtime, and he got the takedown. But they used to put all the Illinois State Finals matches on YouTube, and that was one that I always remember, because I actually wrestled his brother in the middle school circuits years later. So I just saw that. I couldn't believe that when I started this podcast that he was out at Stanford. And I mean, look, he's been there 14 some years. It's just awesome.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's a Stanford guy, and he's helping us with this battle to keep the program, and he's been a tremendous fighter in that too.
So let's talk about that a little bit. I've heard you detail the play-by-play, and heard you on how you found out about 10 times by now. So I'm not going to make you repeat it, but essentially in July, you find out on 25 minutes notice, you're going to get on a Zoom call. They tell everyone the program's dropped. They obviously did their due diligence, and, it came down to money and, budget cuts, really. They say competitive excellence, but when you talk about the wrestling program, you guys were top 20 every year. So I don't see how that even applies to you guys. So essentially they cut it because of COVID and money. And my biggest question for you is, you guys raised $12 million. How big of a number is that for wrestling endowment programs across the country?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for saying all that, and for being up to speed. Well, we've been told, through talks with other colleges and talking to Mike Moyer from the NWCA, that it would be the largest single program endowment in the country. Now, that's not to say that programs haven't received more money than that, maybe for facilities or for
Sure.
certain projects. I don't know, but in terms of money that would just go into an endowment to spin off, a return for wrestling annually, that it's the largest in the country. So, and what is interesting about that is that $12 million, if you're drawing, I guess, 5% conservatively a year off that, you're talking about what's that, put it about $600,000 a year in just interest that you can put
Wow.
toward running your program. And $600,000 a year for us at Stanford would cover most all the operating expenses, the annual budget plus coaching salaries, right? So now all you'd be needing is money for scholarships. And that's just something to be mindful of when we're looking at this. That's how much 12 million is, right? $12 million conservatively is going to get you a $600,000 annual operating budget for your team and for coaching salaries. And so that would allow us to be self-sufficient right there, minus scholarships. So it's pretty remarkable what we've been able to do in 4 or 5 months, and it's a testament to how passionate and how invested our supporters and alumni are.
And it means to me so much more than Stanford wrestling. To me, it's California wrestling at large. To lose a pillar of the Big 12 literally breaks my heart. I couldn't even believe it when I heard the news. It's just amazing you guys have come up with that money. And so it's a testament to you and your staff, but also, just like you said, how much people love Stanford and California wrestling. Are we any closer today than we were in July to getting good news on 2022?
I would say we're a lot closer. When we first started, I mean, if you think about this, when the press release came out, it was, this is final and there's no amount of money and we're not overturning it. Now we've had some glimmers of hope. I wouldn't say it's been off the charts exciting. And that's because, they've put us in a little bit of a tough spot. They said that now, in order to come back, our fate is tied to all the other sports, right? So they cut 11 sports. We're one of them. So there's 10 other sports, and they really have said it's all 11 or nothing. And that's tricky because they want us to raise $200 million for those 11 sports. But we've also been told that if we could come up with a financial solution that would take care of our sport and solve their gender equity issue, that they would have to revisit the decision. They're not saying that they would overturn it, but they'd have to listen and revisit it. And so we are a little bit closer there. But then we know things look a lot different than they did in July, right? The pandemic, we understand financially where we are a little bit more. And I think it's been it's clear now that the endowments and the financial strains that we maybe forecasted or projected aren't as severe as thought. And so we've just got a clear picture. So I think, considering the world's a lot different than it was 11 months ago or 7 months ago, leads us to be hopeful. And we've also got a lot of people that are really supporting and behind our return, and not just wrestling people. We have alumni from all programs. We have professors, faculty members, some board of trustees. We have people at all levels that are really thinking twice about this. So that's good.
That's outstanding. I've also heard that it would be helpful if you had, when you said the gender issue, so if Stanford sponsored a women's wrestling team, is that a reality that could happen? Because that seems fantastic.
Yeah, well, so definitely. First off, having a women's program in some capacity just needs to happen, right? It's the right thing to do from just across the country. Women's wrestling, the growth of it, they need opportunities. They need Division I opportunities. So we kind of went into this thinking, one, that's the right thing to do, but two, we need to figure out a way to integrate a women's program into our return regardless. We just need to. And so that's a part of it. It's a component. What I think is probably more logical and doable in the early stages is, instead of starting a full-blown women's team that's separate, bringing women onto our men's roster and then slowly building a club team on campus and then transitioning over time into a full-fledged NCAA women's team. The reason for that is more optics. They cut a handful of women's sports when they made these 11 cuts. And so to just start a women's team that's not one of the ones they cut, it would be harder to convince them to do that. So we feel like starting an integrated roster with women, and then starting a women's club team, and then eventually the club team goes up to full varsity status is kind of our path to getting the women going. But we need it for sure.
That makes so much more sense. I mean, you already have just put them on the roster, and they can either have combined workouts, separate workouts. I mean, we'll talk about some of the workouts you're doing on the tennis courts out there, because I saw that and I was just blown away. But I mean, that I tell you, everyone knows that college wrestling should have women's teams, obviously, but think about how much it does to protect us from Title IX. Even outside of it's the right thing to do, but just if we want college wrestling, this is going to help. No brainer.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it would help. We don't know if it would, but I look at it more as just growing the sport, right? There's a lot of women, a lot of females out there that love wrestling as much as you and I do, and they should have an opportunity to compete. I think long term probably makes sense to have the women competing against the women, but I think that in the short term, whatever we can do to provide opportunities for women wrestlers across the country, we need to do it, whether that's rostering them with the men or not, right? And so we're all for it. And we've had a couple girls on our rosters in the past. I mean, Patricia Miranda was on the men's roster, and Christine Cunningham, Jolene Oshiro, couple girl, 3 girls off the top of my head that wrestled at Stanford, and then I know other teams have done it as well. So we need to put our minds together collectively as a men's wrestling and figure out ways to help get the women's wrestling going, because yes, it might help us long term, but more so than that, they deserve the opportunities. And we need to create them.
Absolutely. And so 2021, Stanford will have a season and you guys will wrestle through. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. I tell you what, man, last year you guys won was it last year or the year before you won the Pac-12s?
Yeah. The 2008, what was last year's season? 2019, the year before. Yeah.
2019.
Last year we finished second. Yeah.
I mean, but even last year, I mean, you guys had 4 freshman national qualifiers. I'm an Illinois guy, Real Woods. I mean, what can you say about that kid? He's fantastic. But even you had, a younger Abbas in there that was going to be starting this year. Maybe is going to be starting this year. I mean, the health of the Stanford program could not have been in a better spot before this all happened. Can you talk about some of the recent successes?
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. We are very optimistic. You said some of the guys, but I mean, and they're young, so we're optimistic and young. We had 4 freshman NCAA qualifiers, but we had 3 other qualifiers that. So we have 7 returning qualifiers on this year's roster.
Wow.
And then you add Jaden Abbas and some other young guys to it. So we have a very healthy young team, and really excited about the direction we're going. But Shane Griffith was a freshman undefeated. He was a 3 seed. He was a Hodge finalist. Real Woods, like you mentioned, had 1 loss, was a 3 seed going into NCAAs. Tyler Ishins was a freshman NCAA qualifier at 157, had a great year. Jackson Desario, a true freshman out of Georgia, was a freshman NCAA qualifier. Jaden Abbas won the Southern Scuffle in redshirt. We had a heavyweight that was dealing with injuries last year that qualified as a freshman and missed last year, Hayden Maley. We had Raquir Vandermeer, who was our 149 pounder and he was a 14 seed at the NCAAs as a sophomore. Last year as a junior, dealt with injuries and didn't make the NCAA tournament, but it's back this year. So, I mean, we have Nathan Traxler, one of our veterans, who Illinois kid, St. Charles area. Marmion Academy. He let's see, this would be a senior year. So he was a junior last year, was a top 12 seed at NCAAs, and just, we feel really good about, our future, our chances. We're excited. We were super excited going into NCAAs last year and got canceled. And we're super optimistic coming into this year. We think that, we honestly think we can be in the top 8, top 5 and be hunting for a trophy with the right tournament. There's nothing that thinks we can. I think we have a handful of guys that can win the NCAA championship, and we have a lot of guys that can be All-Americans. So we're excited.
Yeah, I forgot about Shane Griffith. When he had a pin against Ohio State, and that was the first time I was like, oh man, that's kid something. And then, I mean, the stats you just mentioned, if I had no idea, that's incredible that he had that good of a season. I mean, so easily you get a couple finalists.
Yeah, it was not. Yeah. Yeah, he was. I mean, Shane and Real had great years. And Shane, I think he was 27 or 29-0 conference championship, beat Josh Shields twice, who was ranked in the top 6. He beat the Oklahoma State kid at the Southern Scuffle, who was a top 4 seed at nationals. He beat he had a really good resume, and he's just kind of quiet, goes about his business, wins a lot of wrestling matches, shows up every single day, is super committed, super competitive. He's an awesome kid, and can't ask for anything more than that. But he's chomping at the bit for this year too.
Man, I'm excited. Now, one of the things that's jumping out to me is, you talk about this roster you have, and you've got kids from all over the country, and the recruiting is really top notch at Stanford, but you're doing it against one of the lowest acceptance rates in the country. I mean, Stanford academically tops of the tops, limited scholarships, right? And so what you've been able to do is incredible. And I heard you one time on a YouTube video, it was called Recruiting Red Flags. And you told a story about, you were in this recruit's living room, and you kind of had this dilemma of signing this kid would have been good for your program, but it would have been good for your team's culture. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I remember the kid. I remember where I was, but I won't use his name against him. But I was sitting in his house. We just finished eating. I think we were sitting in the living room, if I remember exactly where we were. And I just remember having a talk, and he was really good. And he was a big time recruit. And in fact, he went on to have a decent career. I would say he didn't do exactly what I had thought he was capable of doing, but he did okay. But I should remember him telling his mom to shut up in the middle of a conversation. And I was just like, it was like a big red flag for me. One, it was just super rude. But 2, what I remember going through my head was, if he's willing to tell his mom to shut up in front of a college coach, imagine what he's willing to tell his college coach to do in front of nobody. Right. So I was like, I was just like, it's probably just not going to work. And, we just moved in a different direction. That was it. It was easy as that, because I've had that advice from people before where, you set a standard, and if people meet it, go full force for them. Those are the people you want in your program. But if they don't check the boxes, you probably should back away, because if you have that gut feeling, it's usually right. So.
But it's tempting to say you have a Fargo Champ or a top 10 recruiting class, knowing that someone like that would help. But then, long term, it could be toxic.
Yeah, it is. But again, like you said, I think that far outweighs the other, right? Like, so
Yeah.
yes, he comes in and he does well. The problem is even if he comes in and has a little bit of success and even underachieves, but has some success, people look at that and might say, well, he's doing well, so I can be, a dingbat too, or I can push the bar a little bit. What you need is you need the the perfect like scenario is that your most successful athletes, the one that are doing the best, are the ones that are the most bought in and believe in your culture and are the hardest working and live the right lifestyles. That's when you have a chance. That's when you have a chance to be great. That's honestly the when if you talk about the formula is your best athletes, your most successful athletes are the ones that are doing things right, or the ones whose values align with the coach, the program's values. That's kind of the perfect storm.
Yeah, I mean that comes together, not every day, but you happen to have a ton of kids that fit that bill, and so we're excited to see what happens in 21. And the season's underway now. It's finally it's great to finally say that. I wanted to wind down with a couple rapid fire questions. Does that work, Coach?
Well, that works.
No, gotchas, nothing like that. So I heard that you are an avid Jordan shoe collector. I am not, so I won't be asking you about that. But in relation to that, I assume you watched The Last Dance, and if so, what was your favorite Last Dance moment or episode? Because I've watched it about 10 times.
Yeah, geez, I have watched it. I've only watched it once, so not as many as you, but there was a lot.
Or what sticks out to you about
Yeah,
reliving
I
those
think
days?
a lot of things. I mean, I love Michael Jordan, so I know a lot of that stuff, and I've followed it a lot. But probably his interactions. I thought the whole story from Steve Kerr, like
Yeah.
when the exchange they had, I thought that was pretty interesting for me, of like just kind of like that. But what really stuck out to me, I guess, as I think about this more, and this isn't exactly rapid fire, so I'm
That's
taking some
okay.
time.
No.
But the
Hit me.
part, just the fact that like when Michael Jordan was saying like that's who I was, right? Like, and people knew who I was, and some people weren't that way and weren't that competitive and didn't want to hear it that way, but like that's who I was. And just the idea that sometimes you have to be true to yourself, and you have to have confidence in who you are, and not necessarily try to change because of those around you, like being confident in who you are, right? And just having that inner self confidence, like, was, and I guess it's why he was great, right? He led a certain way and demanded and expected so much of his teammates, and was willing to call you out if you weren't doing it. And I value and appreciate that a lot, right? Even though maybe he knew some people didn't like it, or felt like he was a jerk or whatever it was. So.
And on that same note, think about Phil Jackson being true to himself. He came in and said, "I'm not giving MJ the ball anymore," and had to stand up to him for, probably multiple seasons of just getting ridiculed by MJ.
Right. No doubt.
Man, that's God, I love that documentary. Anyone who listens to this show knows it. So
I know it is. It's amazing. We haven't integrated it into our team yet, but we talk about it a lot as a staff. Like, we need to make it like we're the guys need to watch that, because you can learn a lot from it.
Yeah, just the competitiveness is awesome.
Yeah.
I alluded to this earlier, and again, I say rapid fire. It's really just 3 quick questions at the end. I alluded to this earlier. You guys are practicing on the tennis courts, and we all know that California is one of the strictest places in the world right now with these kind of guidelines. What led to you guys practicing on the tennis courts? What's going on out there?
Well, so our county, Santa Clara County, when we first came back, we actually didn't come back until November, and we got going. Everything was moving along nicely. We were inside practicing, and then the county changed they went to a shelter in place, and so you could not have any indoor or outdoor contact with anyone else. The caveat being, kind of the loophole, was that if you were a single household, you could have contact activity. So if you lived together, you could work out together in a contact setting as long as it was outside. So thankfully, when we moved back to campus in early November, mid-November, they moved us into a dorm called suites, where each suite has 6 bedrooms. And so 6 people were living together. So we had 4 suites of 6. So for 24 people, four suites of 6 different pockets of people living together. And so we were able to take 4 mats, and that each one of those suites became a household, and they could have contact activity. So we put 4 mats out because we have 24 guys, and 6 people could train together on a mat. And that's what we've been doing to get kind of creative, to get around the guidelines of the county. And it's been going fine. Thankfully, we have great weather. We've only been rained out like twice, I think, over the last few weeks. And, it's about 60, 62 and sunny most of the days. And that feels great. That feels like 70 degrees. So it's been fine. It's a good change of pace, change of scenery. And I think the guys enjoyed it, especially in the early weeks. They really liked it. So
I think it's awesome because you're getting the vitamin D, which you don't usually get in the winter. But for people who don't know, I lived in San Francisco for 5 years. Stanford is just one of the most, Palo Alto is one of the most beautiful places in the world, just scenery wise. I know you live on campus, so I'm sure you're right in the thick of it, but I mean, what a place to be practicing outside at in the dead of winter.
It is. It is beautiful. I mean, and you pay for it. It's very expensive to live here.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the weather, we live in this like climate bubble, right? So it might be 62 degrees here tomorrow and sunny. But if you travel 20 miles north to San Francisco, it's 40 degrees and windy and cold, right? Or you go to the Half Moon Bay and you're on the ocean. We are just tucked in this little climate bubble where in our Palo Alto area, the weather just stays amazing most of the year. It's really remarkable. And that's why real estate is so high. And that's why a lot of people desire to be here. But the campus is really, really pretty. It's very scenic. They take great care of it. They pride themselves on facilities, and the weather cooperates 300 plus days a year. So it's a great place to be.
Absolutely. The other cool story I found about your program was that at the beginning of the year, your freshmen, they actually lived out at a recruit's parents' house, right? They gathered and lived out. What's that story? Because that was just another way you guys are innovating that I was just blown away by.
Yeah, well, not a recruit's parents' house. One of the freshmen on the team, one of the incoming freshmen. He pretty local. Built a good relationship with the other 7 incoming freshmen. The parents all got to know one another, and they kind of brainstormed. And I think the mother and father of Peter, one of our bigger freshmen, our heavyweight freshmen, just wanted to try to come up with a way to give those freshmen that experience of being together during a pandemic. And so he coordinated with the families, and they all agreed to all 8 of all but one. So 7 of them came out and decided to move in. He has a garage that they kind of converted into like a bunkhouse. And so they had enough desk space so they could have because they were taking classes online. And so he invited them all out, had a garage out back that he put a wrestling mat in. And so was able to give them a somewhat freshman experience. They got to come in, they got to be together, they got to meet each other in person, hang out. And they did that for a few months until we were able to bring them to campus. And so it's an awesome experience for them because they got to build a bond that's really strong. And it's actually neat to see now how close those guys are that were doing that. Imagine going through what we're all going through with a group of buddies, facing all these challenges, going through battle to save your program, dealing with the pandemic, just everything, right? Yeah. Learning from home, and having 6 or 7 guys alongside with you that they're going to be connected for life, just because of the last few months, right? So
it's pretty cool experience. I mean, the thing that your guys go through too is that for the first time they're really getting maybe not for the first time, but for kids who went to a normal high school like me, going to Stanford would be a major change academically. And so just to handle that is something, let alone doing it remote. So it's just awesome that they all got together.
Yeah, it was awesome, and so grateful for the Ming family, but also that the other parents were willing to let their kids do it. Right, it takes a lot to to kind of send your kid across. It's one thing to send your kids across the country to go to college and move into Stanford, but it's another to move into a house of a family you hardly know, that you've only known for a few months and just got to know them, so
crazy. Wow. So thank you for sharing that. Two more quick ones. I've had a couple requests lately to ask about favorite books. So do you have any books that you've gifted a lot over the years or that have had a big impact on you?
My wife's the big reader in the family, but I've read a lot of great books. I don't gift them, but I liked Good to Great,
Yep.
and Built to Last. Trying to think of, you like kind of professional, like growth and development. Those are the types of things I'm into a little bit more. But over a certain period of time, I feel like they just start cluttering and clogging your mind, right? You hear so many different ways of doing things that sometimes you just got to do it and, learn and fail on your own. But, leadership books, those would be the ones that jump out. I enjoy reading more now lately for just like kind of like entertainment, like things that I just start reading and that there's just like take my mind other places, right? Yeah. So
yeah, if you looked at my library, you'd think I'm having a midlife crisis. They're all self-help. Fair enough, though. I appreciate that. Last question. Normally we ask, how did wrestling change your life? But I heard this story about you and this coach calling you that I thought it was so cool. I had to ask. On one of the podcasts you did with Kyle Kleeman lately, you shared that during this time of, the program being canceled, college coaches are calling you to essentially get the lowdown on some of your guys, right? Because some are going to be transferring. But John Smith calls you, doesn't even ask about that. He's legitimately concerned about your program. I just thought that was the coolest story. So maybe we could wind down with that.
Yeah. But that's exactly what happened, at least through my eyes, right?
Yeah.
He called me and I thought he was calling about Real Woods, who had just gone in the portal at the time. And some other coaches had reached out about him. And literally within 2 days of like the announcement, or 3 days, right? It was a very short period of time. So I was still very charged and emotional about what was happening. And he went in the portal, and I was dealing with I remember just being like, gosh, like this is another thing I don't want to be like dealing with right now, is having to answer, about why Real's in the portal. But John called, and right away I was kind of like, hey, calling about Real. And we talked for a little bit, and he was asking me questions. And, a couple minutes into the conversation, I was like, are you calling because you want to know about Real? And he's like, no. He's like, I was calling to see how I can help, and wanted to know what was going on. And then we talked a little bit longer, and we never talked about Real, not once. It never came up. And other than him saying that if we felt like the program had a chance to be saved, he needed to stay here. And I was like, oh, great. And,
Wow.
part of me thought like, okay, saying the right things, but I did ended up hearing afterwards that he connected with Real and told Real and his family the same thing, that if he needed, not only did he need to stay, if he thought the program was going to be saved, but if he did and he was going to stay here, he needed to get out of the portal, that he needed to not be in it. And I think that that was helpful too, because it's not just us as your coach telling you that. When you hear it from other people, and same thing, we talked about this at the beginning of the show, when my coach says one thing, but then when Casey says something, like it can have a different impact. So different voice can impact you a different way. But I think went a long way hearing that from Coach Smith. So.
The crazy thing is that in 93, Pat Smith was a senior and Oklahoma State was banned from the 93 NCAAs, and he almost transferred to Arizona State and wrestled for Leroy. And
Right.
John has said that would have completely decimated the program, so it's just, when you have those tough times, having people stay together is important. And so that's just cool that he called you, though. I thought that was a great story.
It was. And as somebody who, he didn't really need to, right? That's the thing I go back to, is like, could have just contacted the recruit if that's what it was about. Didn't really need to call me, but he did. And I was just appreciative of that, because, just hearing that you have support from other programs and other coaches is big. And I get that, like, maybe they can't tweet about it. They can't do a lot of things because they don't want to look like they're supporting another college, or that they're tampering with recruits down the road. There's all kinds of things, but to have them call and to say, hey, we're behind you, we support it, what can we do behind the scenes to help, like that goes a long way too.
Absolutely. And last but not least, help save Stanford Wrestling. How can folks listening to this show who love wrestling help? Keep Stanford Wrestling is the website. I believe you can donate there. Outside of the financial contribution, which we hope anyone who can will do something, what can folks do to help the cause for you? Because we want to help whatever way we can.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is in a positive way, reaching out to the decision makers on campus. It sounds goofy, but the more people they hear from,
Yeah.
And we need it from all angles. Obviously, big donors helps, because anytime you're a board of trustee or a provost or a president or the AD, and you start hearing from people that are big financial contributors to your university, that has an impact, right? If they're not happy, but like just hearing from people in the wrestling community goes a long way, because they need to understand that this doesn't just affect a small subset of people. It affects a lot of people all across the country. So that could be helpful. I think following us on social media and in chiming in and retweeting and sharing messages is helpful too, because the more people that see what's happening, the more awareness we can create. You never know who can help influence in a big way, right? And so I think sharing our content, pushing it out so other people can see it, but also letting our decision makers hear your voice in a positive and constructive way, right? You're not venting and flying off the handle about why we should have wrestling. But those are the biggest things I would say.
Okay. Well, we will share all the social handles as well as hashtags in the show notes. I think I'm getting it mixed up between, is it SaveStanfordWrestling.com or KeepStanfordWrestling.com?
Keep Stanford Wrestling. There is a Save Stanford Wrestling that started, and that's not our alumni group is KeepStanfordWrestling.com, and so that's the website. That's all the social media handles are KeepStanfordWrestling.com.
Beautiful. I will like I said, I'll link to that. Coach Borrelli, it's been a real honor, sir. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks a lot for having me on, and anytime and any way I can help you, let me know.
Will do. Thank you.